أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا الحسين عليه السلام. May Allah increase in our rewards for commemorating the martyrdom of the master of Shuhada, Aba Abdullah al-Husayn. Tonight in our second discussion, as we continue our topic of keeping alive the spirit of faith in these difficult times as we go through this process, one of the areas that is significant for us to always prepare for and develop for is personal development, especially personal development as it comes in line with our faith. Yesterday we began our discussion by talking about the idea, or we included in our discussion the idea of talking about how the same way that professions have continuing education and development, the same way an individual should continue their process of education and development on a personal and individual level. One of the benefits that we have in our professional development is that many times there's a board or for example, an organization that sits at the top that gives us instruction and preparation for how and where we need to focus our education and continuing our education, and what are the important points to cover. In the case of personal development, unfortunately, it's not so much the case. It winds up being more of an effort that is restricted to the resources that are available. And historically, we had very limited resources, especially in the English language living in Western countries. But alhamdulillah, as time has progressed, so has the availability of resources, and so has the access to information and new content and material uniquely for English-speaking individuals. Now, the importance of continuing development or continuing education and self-development is not something that is unusual or unheard of, but rather something that is consistent with the tenets of Islam and was an expectation and a requirement not just now, but from the beginning in the advent of faith. When we take a look, for example, in Surah Ra'ad, verse number 11, where Allah is saying, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ, which is a very famous part of the Holy Quran that we reference many times, where Allah is saying Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change within themselves or they bring about that change as their own responsibility. This verse, while taking into consideration a communal aspect and how a community or a group of people, when Allah is speaking of a qawm, the discussion is that a community itself needs to be going through the process of development for the condition to change, but the same is true of the individual. That if we want Allah to improve our condition, if we want Allah to improve what we have for ourselves or to make us in a better situation, then we have to invest in ourselves and continue the process of self-development. And as we bring change within ourselves, Allah brings barakah and khair to that development. Now, in the aspect of this not being a new concept, one, we take a look here and we see that the idea that in the Quran, Allah is giving the instruction that a people change themselves and then Allah brings about change for them, which is very true. We also see the statement within the Quran where Allah is giving instruction to Rasulullah, قُلْ رَبِّي زِدْنِي عِلْمًا, Oh Allah, increase in my knowledge. That's a personality like Rasulullah is discussing the increase in knowledge. Therefore, Rasulullah himself is asking for more from Allah. We see in the same process, we see the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, who gave us the instruction that Thursday nights are a night in which Allah, through their ibadat and worship of Allah, Allah brings them to a place upon which their knowledge is increased for and gives them the information that they need for assisting in that time period that comes until the next week comes. All of these are points that show us that even at the highest levels of faith, there is a process of increase in knowledge and increase in development and increase in personal awareness that goes on. As I mentioned, this isn't something new to the tenets of Islam. When we even take a look and we see the initial companions of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. From them to the companions of Ali Muhammad, to the companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Imam Sadiq, Imam Kadhim, Imam Radha, till the end of time. These personalities who narrate to us a hadith from the Ahlul Bayt, they're not children. They're not simple individuals or common people. They are grown, mature, respected people in their own communities and in their environments who are then turning around and going through a process of self-development by going to the Imam and asking the Imam. You see, one of the things that we need to continuously work on is the process of developing systems of engagement and communication. Many of the lessons we get from the Ahlul Bayt are not monologues where the Imam is simply giving an instruction back and forth. Many times they are dialogues where the Imam is sitting with people and there's a process of communication. There's a talab, there's a desire, a want that comes to the Imam, and the Imam in turn fulfills that desire and that want of that individual. This talab, this desire, this asking is something that allows a person to change and to grow and to develop. Which is why these narrations that we take a look at are not children who come to Ahlul Bayt to ask for information. They're mature, responsible people, which indicates one of the fundamentals that we're talking about. Continue the process of your growth and development in the terms of faith. Learn more about your faith, learn more about your process of education, as was the example of the Ahlul Bayt teaching this process. Now, as we see the example of these individuals who all, that even in the time of our Holy Prophet, they weren't children who accepted Islam, they were men and women who were grown and mature, but they acknowledged the necessity of faith, the importance and the value of faith, and therefore they moved in a direction that involved their growth and development to appreciate that faith and apply it to their own personal lives. Alhamdulillah, the benefit that we have is that we are born into a faith. And we are born into the love of Ahlul Bayt, or we are someone who has been given the benefit of the inheritance of Iman that laid our fundamentals. But the implication of that is not sufficient to say that the moment from which I am born, that faith is complete and I need nothing to do with it ila yawm al-akhir. No. As a matter of fact, it's a point that needs development and focus and growth. The same way that, for example, we say someone who receives an inheritance of wealth, using wealth as an example, though wealth we know is the inheritance of the Fir'aun, and knowledge and akhlaq is the inheritance of the Anbiya. But for us, in a way to see the impact, we look at wealth as an example. If one was to receive an inheritance of great wealth, and they did nothing to increase or improve that wealth or to add with it, and they only took from it, we would say that maybe they have squandered their inheritance. They did nothing to improve the situation. We would say at the very least, they didn't improve the condition of those who would come after them. The same can be said when we look at the concept of faith. If we inherit faith, and then we never make a change in that faith or improvement in that faith and improve the condition of the faith as to present better than what we received, or to improve that which is inherited by the generation which comes after us, one could argue faith has been squandered. That it's been something that was given to you in goodness and you did not add value or appreciate what was given to you. You only took advantage of it and you didn't improve it. When we look at, for example, even the idea of a person and their reward and punishment with Allah, we see that there are amongst people in society who have never had access to Islam, who have never had the ability to learn about faith. We don't condemn them to hell. We don't condemn anyone to hell. As a matter of fact, we know from the example of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, that even he was not privy to Allah's decisions about how some of his companions or their affairs would be settled. Sa'ad ibn Ma'adh was buried by the hands of Rasulullah, receives punishment of Allah afterwards. We see examples from even the case of Nabi Dawood alayhi salam, where when he is told that a person in his community is a fasiq, is someone who is a hypocrite, Nabi Dawood avoids this individual, saying that, oh, he is someone who lies about the faith of Allah. He brings an apparent face of faith, but secretly he is someone who doesn't follow the faith of Allah. Upon the death of that individual, Jibreel comes and says, Dawood, why didn't you go attend the funeral of this individual? Nabi Dawood says, Jibreel, you were the one who told me he's a fasiq. But Jibreel says, because of the mu'mineen praying over him, Allah forgave his hidden sins and accepted the face and the value that society knew of him. Each of these teaches us that the true value of what a person's character is not disclosed to even the Anbiya of Allah, that it is upon the apparent nature of how their behavior is. Our goal is the process of learning and improving in this process to increase and improve both our hidden nature and our apparent nature. And that process of self-development is in constant continuation, and the need for it that we have is that improvement improves our condition and brings us closer and closer to Allah. In this way, there are 3 areas that we want to talk about of looking at personal development to help us focus that as we want to keep Islam alive within ourselves, that we go through this process of continuing our development and improve ourselves. With every day our faith increases and improves. The 3 that we'll take a look at is 1, in our amaliyat, in our actions and our acts of worship. 2 is our akhlaq. And 3, finally, is our spirituality. And we'll look at techniques that we can utilize to improve our personal development in all 3 of these realms, and how we focus on each of them to increase our personal development. When it comes to the first category of our a'mal, our actions, our ibadat that we want to improve and process self-development in, we begin with certain fundamentals of what is wajib and concentrating first what is on wajib before we do the addition of what is mustahab. When it comes to the actions that are wajib for us, there are ways for us to improve and focus and concentrate on our self-development. One of the statements that I implore people to think about and ponder over is the idea that if my salat, which is wajib upon me to perform, does not change and grow and improve as my age and maturity grows and improves, I have done an injustice to my prayers. For example, typically a child learns to pray at the age of 9 or 10, or younger, 8, let's say. At the age of 8, I teach my child to pray. Khalas, tamam, he knows how to pray. But if that prayer at the age of 20 has not changed, improved, has not had some kind of focus done upon it, we would say that what's the benefit of praying for 12 years if you haven't added something to it? Any action that we do for a great period of time should be something that has idafa, improvement, has gradual progression within it, has a reflection of continuing education within it. The same way my fast, if I am fasting and my fasting is simply that I abstain from food and drink and water, we would say that I never appreciated or increased in the benefit of fasting and what I can achieve from it. We have these narrations from Ahlul Bayt that say that what is that fasting in which there is no fasting of the hands or of the mouth or of the eyes? Meaning that these are all reflections and improvements of the gradual progression we need to go through as we fast and we develop ourselves as individuals. That we learn, we focus on these items of our growth and we add to them. In the concept of salat, there are some recommendations that, for example, that show us the progression of self-development. We see narrations, for example, from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. When a person comes to him and says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, how do I concentrate in prayer? Imam Sadiq says to him, focus on your place of sujood and don't look away. Sometime later, a second person comes and says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, how do I increase my concentration in prayer? How do I increase my focus in prayer? Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says to him, pray in such a way that it is if that you believe this is the last opportunity you will get to pray in this life. And let that help you concentrate on focus upon completing your prayers. A third person comes and says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, how do I increase my concentration in prayer? Imam Sadiq says, pray in such a way that it is as if you can see Allah. But recognize and understand that while you can't see Allah, Allah is constantly looking at and aware of you and your actions. These three ahadith put together give us an instruction manual of the increasing of concentration in prayer. And that there is a progression in the development of how I focus my salat. That we take a look and we see that the first individual is one who is easily distracted by his environment. His surroundings take him away from his focus. He gets curious about people walking past him or things happening around him. So the Imam says the first phase of you increasing your focus in your prayer and staying concentrated and developing your prayer is make sure that you are focused on one focal point, that your eyes do not wander in this salah. The second individual is one who, while his physical attention may be focused, his mental attention seems to wander. That he starts thinking about other things. He thinks about what he's going to do after his salat. He's going to think about what else he has to accomplish. So the Imam gives him the instruction, imagine that this is the last thing you're going to do in your life. That this is the last prayer you'll get to say. Here the Imam is showing the process of mental refocusing, that this individual is someone who now thinking about what's coming next, thinking about what he has to do after this is lost, because this is the last thing I'm ever going to do in my life. The third individual is one who now the Imam is giving instruction that use your salat to attain proximity to Allah by becoming cognizant and aware of the presence of Allah, not just yourself and your affairs. You see, the first individual was very focused on his physical presence and focusing his physical presence. The second person was focused on focusing and developing his mental presence. The third person is now working on cognizance of his awareness of Allah. In this way, we see a physical process by which salat can have a mental focus that we are working on developing. We take a look and we see from another aspect, we see the hadith of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam. Alamat al-mu'min khamsa, that the signs of a mu'min are 5, that he wears a ring in his right hand, that he recites Bismillah in a loud volume, he does the ziyarat of arba'een, he is someone who prays 51 rakat in a day. This 51 rakat in a day is another place of growth and development within our salat, is the increase in the ibadat and the focus of worship that we add and that we are praying these salat in a day. These 51 rakat are the inclusion of the 17 wajib along with the nawafil, 2 for fajr, 8 for dhuhr, 8 for asr, 4 for maghrib, 2 for isha, and the 11 salatul layl, 11 rakat of salatul layl. Now, it may happen that, for example, a person, when they hear of these riwayat about the focus and the intention and the attribute of a mu'min that he prays 51 rakat in a day, that what they do is they begin the process and they say, khalas, I'm going to go from 17 to 51. What we say and what our ulama have taught us and spiritual instruction has taught us is that one who goes from a very minimal amount to a very high amount in a very quick progression has the ability that he can lose this focus and that he can lose this ability, and that he will burn out by going through such a quick progression. Rather, what they say, go through a gradual progression of adding. Here again comes the concept of self-development in ibadat. that go through gradual, add slowly. Add, for example, it's recommended the 2 rakat nawafil of Fajr. Start with example Salatul Layl. And when we start with Salatul Layl, if the 11 seems to be too much to start with just the Shaf and Witr. The 2 rakat Salatul Shaf, 1 rakat Salatul Witr. If that seems too much, start with a 1 rakat Salatul Witr. When it comes to, for example, the next place to add, they say add the Nawafil of Maghrib. Add the Mustahab prayers of Maghrib. And amongst them, add Salatul Ghufayla before you add the others. And the ahmiyat of Salatul Ghufayla. There are other aspects of self-development, for example, in the case of our a'mal as well too, for example, taking account of ourselves on a regular basis. One of the instructions that we have that, for example, in a wasiyah, when you write your will, you don't just talk about the money that you have to give or money that's associated with you. Talk about the actions and the wajibat, if you have any qadha that you have left to give, any nadhr that you have to give, any debt that you have to pay. That the place of the will is where also the inclusion of all of these affairs happens. Many times it happens, an elder person in our family passes away. And the ones, his lineage, his family that remains after him, want to assist him. They want to do a kindness for their deceased relative. But they turn and they ask each other, did he have any qadha salat? Did he have any qadha fast that he didn't make up? No one knows. There's no record of this information. One of the things that we should be doing with our time and making sure as part of our development is that we have a track and a record. Is there something that I've missed? Is there an obligation upon me that I have to fulfill and complete? Let me make a note of it so that as I have free time, as I have days in my life, I know what I need to accomplish and I can fulfill and work on accomplishing these tasks. All of these become part and parcel of the aspect of character and individual development in the actions of faith. We see further, for example, that one of the things that happens now is that free time is constantly something that is being occupied by the affairs and responsibilities of technology. We see that, for example, people are busier now than they were before. Why? Because there's always something demanding your attention. There's always some form of communication, information, detail, structure, social development that is happening, that you have access to. And we become busy in these affairs. One of the ways that we can take responsibility and continue our self-development through ibadat and action is, for example, the use of, for example, tasbih. Keeping a tasbih with us. And reminding ourselves that when I have a free moment, when I am looking at something, when I have something going on, I can turn a tasbih in my hand and do dhikr of Allah. This dhikr of Allah, this turning of the tasbih, there are even narrations that tell us from the Ahlul Bayt that even just simply turning a tasbih in your hand will be ibadat. Doing the dhikr of Allah is on top of that. But that tasbih in my hand is something that is a reminder for me to come back to something that associates Allah with my life. Adds Allah back into my day-to-day routine. Gives me the focus that I'm communicating with my Lord. All of these, each of these aspects, and there are so many others when we take a look at the concept of fasting, when we take a look at, for example, even the concept of sadaqah and giving of charity. We see that, for example, in Surah Munafiqun, Allah makes a statement, وَأَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقْنَا مِنْ قَبْلُ أَنْ يَأْتِيَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتِ فَيَقُولَ رَبِّ لَوْلَا أَخَرْتَنِي إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ قَرِيبٍ فَأَصَدَّقَ وَأَقُمْ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. This ayah tells us and talks to us about the importance of how Allah is talking about our amaliyat and development, that don't wait to give charity. Allah is saying, give away from your wealth, spend from it before death comes to you. Because if death comes to you, then you will say, فَيَقُولُ رَبِّ لَوْلَا أَخَرْتَنِي إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ قَرِيبٍ. Oh Allah, oh my Lord, why did you not delay me to a later time? فَأَصَدَّقَ وَأَقُمْ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. So that I could give charity and be amongst the good ones. These instructions are important for us to understand that there is a responsibility for self-development and we need to constantly be working on it. Otherwise, we will be the losers in the actions of our ibadat. And we need to constantly do an increase and focus in development. Create a plan. How am I going to add to my actions? How am I going to add to my behavior? The second arena, for shortage of time, otherwise within ibadat, in self-development, there are many places we can focus. Whether it's the recitation of Quran, whether it's the dhikr of Allah, whether it's the recitation of adiyah, whether it's the actions and improvement of salat, whether it's the improvement of Many places in our amal that we can make increase and improvement and have a plan for self-development. The significance of the conversation is that each of us should work on this process and look for the resources that we need that are associated, that we can do a process of improvement and development. Look at the example of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, where our fifth Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad, says, I entered upon my father one day and he had been spending his time in ibadat. He said, oh, my son, bring to me that paper from such and such location. And then when he read this paper, it fell from his hands and he said, no one can do ibadat like Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. This is an indication of the self-development of even the Imam himself, is demonstrating that his prayer and his ibadat were something he was always increasing and working upon to improve and to get closer to Allah through these actions. The second area of akhlaq and the development of character. Self-development in our character is something that is always an area that is lacking. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمُ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Our holy prophet said that certainly I have been sent to improve the best of characteristics and character with you. Allah describes the holy prophet as the example of perfection of character. One of the fundamentals of our faith in Islam is to continue our process in dealing with humanity and to improve the akhlaq and the character that we deal with them. Our holy prophet, our Ahlul Bayt, went through the most difficult of circumstances with the demonstration of the best of character and difficulty. Whether we take a look at the example of our holy prophet amongst the munafiqeen of Mecca for 13 years, yet still he is known as As-Sadiq al-Amin. Upon leaving of the city of Mecca for Hijrah, in Tariq we know this for a fact, that when he leaves Imam Ali behind on his bed on the night of Hijrah, Rasulullah gives him the instruction, "O Ali, return the amanat of the people of Mecca that they have entrusted with me." Those same people who are coming with the intention of killing Rasulullah, he's returning their wealth and their property to them. To such an extent, history narrates that Abu Sufyan Mal'un, who would lead the armies in war against Rasulullah, had entrusted his wealth with our holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. This gives us an explanation that character is something that always is in a state and needs to be in a continuous state of development to ensure that the levels that the Ahlul Bayt reach, the example that the Ahlul Bayt presented us, is something that we are always working towards developing ourselves as well. This process of, for example, how we deal with our children, how we deal with our elders, how we deal with our community, our friends, the Ahlul Bayt stress so much that there are documents, for example, Risalat al-Huquq, the treatises of rights, which gives us the fundamental by which we need to adapt and address our community, our friends, our family, our relatives, ourselves, our environment, is all the development of character. When Imam Sadiq says that invite people to our way through your actions, not through your words, is the aspect of discussing character. Now, the influence of Ahlul Bayt on our character is something that in a natural, easy state, when I don't have difficulty, is one of the easiest places for me to apply, for example. That I do good because the Ahlul Bayt did good. The difficulty and the challenges is, what do I do about my character and my development and my behavior when I'm faced with difficulty? When I have a tough day at work, how does my behavior and my character change? When, for example, I have an unnecessary difficulty befall me, does my behavior with my spouse change? Does my behavior with my children change? Does how I choose to speak to people change? When Allah tests me with a difficulty, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِالشَّيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَجُوعٍ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ فَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. This verse that tells us of all of the categories of the examination that Allah will put us through, whether it's fear or hunger, of loss of wealth or loss of safety and security, or sickness in ourselves or from our children and from our valuables. All of these places of examination, what happens to my behavior and my character and my mannerism in those conditions? Do I lose my cool? Do I lose my behavior? Do I step away from the character that Allah wants to see me behaving with? You see, this is an area of self-development that constantly needs attention and focus. Is who am I in difficulty? In ease, each of us can take the confidence and say, we are muhibbi Ahlul Bayt. We love the Ahlul Bayt. We do what the Ahlul Bayt would like us to do. We behave in a fashion that the Ahlul Bayt would like us to behave. Baba, the question is not what you do when life is good and things are okay. In that case, even an evil man is very nice. One who is vile and vicious, you give him everything he wants. Many times you'll see he's good too. The question is what do you do when you are faced with the examinations that Allah has promised you that He will give you in this life? What is your character in that situation? That is what Allah desires to see from you. The example that we talk about, for example, Nabi Ayub, Allah took everything from him. His wealth, his children. And what? Shaitan was trying to show that, oh Allah, you gave Ayub. If you took it away from him, you would see that he is not such a good person. Allah says, then take away from him. They took away his wealth. Nabi Ayub didn't change. They took away his children. Nabi Ayub did not change. They took away his health. Nabi Ayub did not change. The akhlaq and the character that's demonstrated by Nabi Ayub in these situations is what we strive to achieve for. Now, I'm not saying that now you say, oh Allah, give me a difficulty so my character improves. No, may Allah protect the mu'mineen from all of the difficulties. But what we need to do is develop consistency and prepare that how will I behave should Allah give me a difficulty? How will my character be that when I have a difficulty, will I take it out on my wife? Or if it's a wife, will I take it out on my husband? Will we both together, when we have a bad day, take it out on our children? That's someone who doesn't have faith. They need an outlet. Their character changes when difficulty befalls them. A mu'min is someone who shows goodness in character no matter the tribulation he is going through. The reward, when Allah says, فَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, give good, glad tidings to those who are patient. This patience of akhlaq, what is this patience? This patience of akhlaq, this patience in difficulty is not taking out the difficulty on those around you. Not complaining to people about the problems you're going through. Not whining and saying that, oh, no one has had a more difficult day than I have had. These statements, these ideas of complaining about, oh, how hard is my life? No one is in more difficulty than me. Or could it get any worse for me? These are shortcomings of character. There are some of these shortcomings of character that, for example, by focusing on our a'mal, we can bring change to. For example, one of the things that brings bad words to our mouth is the lack of awareness and remembrance of Allah. If we were to remember that Allah is present and that this is His tongue that He's given me, it may reduce our desire to speak foul language and improve our character by doing such, by not speaking foul language. So what we do is we increase our dhikr of Allah. We increase our remembrance of the difficulties of Ahlul Bayt. These commemorations in these nights are there to design to help us to overcome the difficulties of our day-to-day life. That when you see yourself in difficulty, remember, La yawmuka yawmuka ya Aba Abdullah. There is no day like your day, O Aba Abdullah. When you see yourself in difficulty, remember the difficulty of the children of Zahra. Remember the difficulties of Zahra, where she says, difficulties have been poured upon me, that had they been poured upon days, those days would have turned to nights. What is my problem? Why is my behavior changing by a difficulty? These character developments are things that we have to consciously make an effort for, that when difficulty befalls, when loss befalls us, loss of a loved one, a loss in business, a loss of health, all of these, should not have a negative impact on my personality. And that I do that by being conscientious of what I want to be and remembering to strive for that in a state of difficulty. Again, the section of self-development in terms of character is massive. Our goal is simply to point in ishara that this is a place of focus of development. So the same way, develop yourselves. We're not complete. Areas that we need development. One is our worship and our ibadat of Allah and concentrating and improving that ibadat. Another is our character and our dealing with humanity and dealing with society and people and dealing with, for example, our presentation to the world and the reflection of Ahlul Bayt in our behavior and our demeanor and mannerisms. The third area where we do constantly need development and focus is spirituality. You see, living in a materialistic environment and culture where everything is measured and evaluated based upon the possessions that you have, based upon what you can achieve and attain and what you have tied to your name, we become very focused on a materialistic aspect. But the spiritual aspect that's reflected within us also needs attention. A man, as he exists, is the composite of both spirit and body. Our current environment and culture is apt and better than the rest of the world at accommodating, acknowledging, and investing in material. Whether we take a look at the physical investments that we do, for example, in the cosmetic nature of things that we can purchase for ourselves and do for ourselves. They have these, every day there's a new cream about improving your skin and improving, for example, reducing your wrinkles and all these things physically. Every year there's a new model of car, a new model of phone that clearly demonstrates in a physical way your value and your presentation. Whether it's by taking a look at the belt that I have in my belt hoops. The pants are not as important as the belt many times. The belt needs to be more expensive than the pants. The brand names of the clothing that I wear, the types of haircuts that I have, the types of shoes that I wear, the bag that I have in my hand, the laptop all of these material aspects are demonstration, and we know how we can, according to what society teaches us, how we can demonstrate and improve and keep our development in the material world up to pace with the best of the best in society. But have you thought about that other aspect of yourself? That ruh that exists within this body? How do I develop this spirit? What do I do with this spirit? You see, a complete ignorance of this spirit, like any other part of your body, has a process by which development is required. Acknowledgement, awareness, and nourishment is required of this soul. And the absence of that nourishment and awareness and development causes it to atrophy like any muscle. Take a limb and you put it in a cast. When you take the cast off, by the ignoring of that muscle and the lack of use of that muscle, the muscle decreases, it shrinks, it tightens, and then we need therapy to now repair it. If my soul is something that I ignore and that I never develop, I never focus and pay attention to, then tomorrow when my soul is separated from my body and needs to exist alone of the body, it will be an atrophied item. It will be something that does not have the nourishment or the resources or the development to exist in that plane. And it will become a source of difficulty and pain for me. Look at the hadith of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, where he says, death for a disbeliever is taking off clean clothes and a nice appearance and putting on chains and being in a state of difficulty and being imprisoned. And for a believer, death is the removing of the chains in the prison and putting on clean clothes and enjoying his freedom. Look at this in the light of our spirit. That one who never paid attention to his spirit and developed his spirit, now that his spirit is separate from the body, his consciousness tied to his spirit, it's incapable of doing anything. It's incapable of surviving on its own. It's in a state of difficulty. And on the other hand, is that one who invested and trained his spirit, who spent his time acknowledging and becoming aware of his spiritual presence and working on it and nourishing it, that when it's separated from the body, the spirit is free now. The restrictions of the body are removed from it. Our job in spiritual development is the conscientiousness, awareness of Allah and the awareness of the spirit within the body. Focusing on how do we improve the spirit? One is through the aspects of ibadat and dhikr of the kalimat that Allah has given us. That all of the worship that Allah has given us and instructed us to do, those physical actions have a spiritual impact associated with them. That's why our Creator, the one who made us, gave us these actions to perform. Another is the awareness in dua and communication with Allah, and being aware and present in our communication of Allah, acknowledging the spiritual self. You see, for example, in Surah Fatiha, when we recite Surah Fatiha, and we recite it every day in Salat, we recite it many times a day, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Thee do we worship, and thee do we ask for help. Who's this we? Thee do we worship. If I'm praying alone, it's me, I'm alone. Why did I say we? If I'm reciting this surah myself, why am I reciting we? One of the explanations of this we is that it is man acknowledging both his physical and spiritual presence together in front of Allah. That, oh Allah, my body and my spirit both worship you. My body and my spirit both are aware of you. My body and my spirit are both in submission to you, Ya Allah. Having that cognizance and awareness and paying attention to what happens to my spiritual state based upon the actions that I perform. In some cases, for example, we take a look and we see one of the ulama, he writes in his memoirs, he says, I moved to a new location in a Muslim environment, and I went through my normal procedures, and came the time of salat, and I found I did not have the desire to pray. He says, I acknowledged immediately that my spiritual desire to worship Allah had decreased. Something I did affected my spirit. You see, this is someone who is aware of and acknowledges what the impact of his actions have on his spirit, who pays attention to what are the things that make his spirit feel good and that increase in his ability to worship and acknowledge Allah, and what are the things that detract and take him away from it. And the lesson here is long, but we'll keep it very short. The man says, I went through my entire schedule, I went through my entire process, and realized the only change that I had made that could have impacted my spirituality was I went to a new butcher. I was in a new town, so I went to a new butcher. He says, I went to the butcher then to see what does he do. Is there any ishkal? Is there any problem with the meat that maybe I brought? That maybe the consumption of that food, there was some shortcoming in it that impacted and reduced my spirituality. He says, so I stood across the street from my butcher and I watched him as he was talking to his friend, and a man came up to him and placed an order to ask him to prepare a chicken for him. And this man, in the middle of his conversation, without paying attention, immediately took the chicken, and as he's talking, and yeah, I did so and so, and talk. And the Sheikh says, I became frightened internally. I said, this is the butcher I trusted. He didn't take the name of Allah. He didn't make sure he was facing Qibla. He didn't make sure he watered the animal. He just, in the middle of his conversation, without thinking about the sanctity of this creature, the awareness of Allah, the responsibility, the wajibat, the minimum wajibat he had to perform, and he slaughtered the animal. And the Sheikh realized that this lack of awareness in a physical action had impacted his spirituality. The same is true for us. That part of our development is being conscientious of things that have a negative impact on our spirit, and then focusing on how do we avoid those negative things and focus on the positive things. How do we turn around and find those things that nourish our soul and invest in them? Each of these environments are environments where each of us, as every day of our life progresses, we possess the ability to bring about change within ourselves and continue to develop and grow our faith, such that when we meet Allah, we can show that, oh Allah, I may have inherited faith, but I invested and I grew towards you. You are a focus, you are the focus of my life, oh Allah. And look at how what I took that I was given and how I devoted more of it to you. I focused on your love, oh Allah. I focused on getting closer to you. I focused on becoming one that you are pleased with. And this growth and development is something that goes for every day of our life until the last moments of our life. Look at the example of Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. Hur is that personality who himself would hold himself accountable that I am the one who stopped Abu Abdullah in Karbala. I am the one who prevented my Imam from reaching his destination in Kufa. I am the one who brought my Imam to the lands of difficulty and sorrow. Remember when Imam Hussein was proceeding towards Kufa, it was Hur who came with 1,000 soldiers to prevent the path of Imam al-Hussein, who met him along the way. And look at the akhlaq and the character of Abu Abdullah. That when Hur comes and they are thirsty through riding hard through the deserts, they are thirsty and they are in an urgency of their matter. Imam al-Hussein instructs, "Oh everyone, take and ensure that all of these men who will tomorrow prevent us from water are not thirsty and wanting for water." The description comes that Hur was in such a state of shock from the heat, he did not understand how to drink the water, that Imam Hussein, with his own hands, put the water to the mouth of Hur. It wasn't enough that Imam al-Hussein gave water to Hur and to his companions. The Imam ensured that no animal would be thirsty, and that even the horses were watered. Ya Abu Abdullah, in a short time, you will stand before them with an infant in your arms, and you will say that you let the animals drink from this water, but the children of Rasulullah are dying of thirst from it. In that moment, this water that you gave to even the animals, they will refuse to even give it to your asghar. Your akbar will come to you and say, "Oh Father, the thirst is killing us. If we but had a drop of water." Sayyidah Zainab will give instruction to Own and Muhammad that you are the grandchildren of Amir al-Mu'mineen. If you capture Furat because it is your shuja'at, don't drink because your uncle is thirsty, your Imam is thirsty. But today, O Hur, you have received the honor that you were watered by Abu Abdullah. And how did you repay this honor? By preventing him from his journey, by bringing him to the land of difficulties, by bringing an army against the son of Zahra. And yet look, when the day of Ashura comes, it is Hur who is asking, "O Umar Asad, do you truly intend to fight these people? O Umar Asad, do you truly intend to hurt the grandson of the Prophet?" It is Hur who is now evaluating his decisions. It is Hur now who is looking at, what have I done? It is Hur who asks, I am looking to see if heaven is more valuable to me than this world. And look what the decision that Hur makes. He says, I wish to go to Abu Abdullah. I prefer akhirah over anything that this world offers me. The description comes that Hur takes his servant. He says, tie up my hand and bring me as a prisoner before my Imam. That Hur is embarrassed by his actions. Hur is one who is humiliated by what he has done and what he has brought the son of Rasulullah to. And Hur comes to Imam al-Hussein with his hands tied, his head bowed, as a prisoner comes to his owner, and he says, "Oh Rasulullah, can I be forgiven? Ya O son of Zahra, is there any way that I can be forgiven?" Remember, Hur was one who appreciated the status of Imam al-Hussein even when he was wrong. That when Hur stopped the horse of Imam al-Hussein, Imam al-Hussein said to Hur, "Thakulat ummak." May your mother have a weight placed upon her by your misdeeds and your actions. Hur says, anyone else would have said this to me, I would have replied to him in kind. But you are the son of Zahra, the daughter of Rasulullah. I can't reply to you with such language as you have spoken to me. Hur knew of the status of these personalities, but he had separated himself through his actions and came back. He improved his condition to where he came back to Imam al-Hussein on the day of Ashura and asked for the permission to be forgiven and asked for the permission to fight for Abu Abdullah. And it is Abu Abdullah who on this day says, "Forgive me, but I have not water to offer you, my guest who has come to me." Hur says, "Ya Rasulullah, forgive me and give me the permission to fight for you." It is said that Hur insisted that even before the companions, you should be given the freedom to fight, and seeking of coming back from the mistake that he had made. It said that when Hur attacked the army, that he attacked like a ferocious lion who tore through the ranks and reprimanded the people of their standing against the grandson of Rasulullah. And he fought in such a way that it scattered the enemy in directions. They said he fell upon them as a lion falls upon its hunt, until a time came where Hur fell and Imam al-Hussein came to his aid, and Hur asked, "Oh Imam, are you pleased with me?" And the Imam replied, "Anta hurran fi dunya wal akhirah." Oh Hur, you are one who is free in this world and free in akhirah. You are one who has defended the family of Rasulullah. You have made your sacrifice in the way of Ahlul Bayt, and my mother Zahra will be pleased with you. Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Raise our hands again in dua. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. In your homes, in your most deepest of voices, call out 10 times, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, بحق حسين وجده وأبيه وأمه وأخيه وتسعة المعصومين من ذريته. O Allah, hasten the reappearance of the remainder of Ahlul Bayt, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman. Keep our children and our families on the upright religion of Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, this sickness and disease that has spread through the world, remove this sickness and disease from the mu'mineen, the Muslimin, from all of the people. Ya Allah, give shifa'ah to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Give aman to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Ya Allah, we have gathered in the Majlis of Aba Abdullah with the asks and desires to ask of you. Ya Allah, fulfill the hajat and the desires of the mu'mineen wherever they are. Ya Allah, entitle us to shifa of Aba Abdullah in dunya and in akhirah. Rahimullah man yakra'a surat al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.